I don't know whether you've sat through the Putin interview. It is, well, I was going to say it's bizarre, but it is unbelievably routine when you get a Russian authority figure to sit down. They go on and on and on. And so 2 hours, it seems, I think Tucker Carlson has got away with quite a modest interview when it comes down to it. There's not very much substance in what Mr. Putin had to say. At the beginning, it was a bit like watching the beginning of Henry V. If you remember all those documents and arguments about whether or not Henry had the right to invade France. And in the end, it all boils down to tennis, or as he says, balls. That's what it feels like, balls. It's one of the most boring scenes in the play, and it's often played for laughs. Indeed, the Laurence Olivier film in the 1940s definitely played it for laughs. And I think, frankly, Putin's interview should be played for laughs, certainly the first half an hour. What Putin was doing during that time was setting up the historical evidence, if necessary, for his invasion. It's about Greater Russia, or Novorussia, that's what I'm confusing with, Greater Russia or Novorussia, New Russia, this idea that that Russia has a right to these territories, and going back to Catherine the Great and to her gaining Crimea. And he goes on about the Soviet Union, and Stalin and Lenin, and trying to establish that Ukraine is an artificial state. There was a very interesting point in that where he said that it includes bits of Hungary and Romania, and Tucker Carlson interrupts and says, well, does that mean that you've actually discussed it with Viktor Orban about giving back bits of Ukraine to Hungary? And Putin says, well, he hasn't had that conversation, but he knows that Hungary's hungry to have some of its land back. Well, I don't know how he can know that. And there's the most extraordinary bit where he talks about Poland's collaboration with Hitler in the invasion of Czechoslovakia, and then Poland falls prey to the same policies that it pursued against Czechoslovakia. This is Putin rewriting history in the most extraordinary way, and smearing whatever he can. And he sounds very, very convincing throughout. I mean, he sounds relaxed, convincing, even affable. There's a lot of laughter that goes on in the conversation, in the interview, but Putin makes it quite clear who's in charge, and he says, is this a serious talk or a show? No, it's a serious talk. Well, then let me continue with the serious talk. You sit back and listen. And he goes on about how NATO was expanding. He talks about the 5 waves of expansion of NATO. He talks about presidents offering confidential proposals and then being overruled by their juniors. He talks very interestingly about this EU-Russian-US missile agreement. He talks about the rise of Yanukovych and so on, and the rise of Zelensky, and the various pressures that he's under. Would you have you completed the de-nazification? The de-nazification, but he makes it quite clear that de-nazification, his best example of nazification was Zelensky's visit to Canada and the applauding the person who turns out to have been a Nazi. He says, this is the Nazification of Ukraine. This is evidence. I think he's clutching at straws. And as for the idea that the history of this great history, this 30-minute history lesson that justifies Russia's acquisition of Ukraine or bits of Ukraine, the same could be said, frankly, by Ukraine about acquiring Russia. The heart of Russia began in Kiev. The baptism of the Rus began in Ukraine. And so I you know, Putin wants to make a claim that means that Ukraine is part of Russia. Well, yeah, Russia could be part of Ukraine. The same reverse argument could be made. There has to come a point where you simply say, look, you draw a line under the developments and you say, this is the reality we've got, and we accept that. It's like people demanding, invading America to get back the land which was taken from them, or indeed the Dutch invading New York and saying we want New Amsterdam back. This is absurd, and there's a point which this sort of historical justification never stops. And surely Italy on those grounds could invade Britain and say we want the Roman Empire, the furthest reaches of the Roman Empire back. It's nonsense. It's nonsense. And the interview dissolves into a lot of nonsense, a lot of posturing, and fascinating to see. I must say, if this is an actor, he puts up a very convincing job. If this is a dead Putin, he looks very alive to me, or very well thought. And maybe this will convince me that Putin is not dead and in a refrigerator, nestling up against the frozen peas and nursing his piles. But at the same time, I am not wholly convinced that this is a genuine desire to be heard and a genuine desire to trade information and to debate or to get a debate going. As for Tucker Carlson, a lot of the time he has the most extraordinary expression on his face, as if he's surprised by what's being whispered in his ear, translated, or he's just desperate to try and stay awake during the long monologues of Putin. And Putin can do long monologues, so if this is an actor, he's got it absolutely bang on, and he's very good. But I am inclined to eat humble pie and say I think this is genuinely Putin. There are moments where I can see Putin's old face in the image, and there are moments where he looks familiar, and there are also moments where he just looks odd. But he's much more animated here than in so many of the stage television programs that he does for the Russian media. This is animated Putin. This is quite interesting. This is the sort of Putin that you see when he's meeting and greeting people, and I think I'm very happy to recognize that Putin is alive, and terrifyingly affable. Reading into all this stuff, I was relieved when he said that he has no desire for a nuclear conflagration, that he talks about his relationship with George W. Bush in quite positive terms, as good as any American president. But I don't know whether those pluses are enough to justify the length of the interview, because I can't imagine very many people who would have sat through the whole thing. And I must say there's a limit to how much value this long interview offers, but particularly once you've got through the first half an hour. The first half an hour, frankly, you should whiz through it. You shouldn't bother looking at it. So there's only 1.5 hours of serious content, and a lot of that is repetitive. But it's interesting, and there's a lot to take away. I hope analysts will study this and see if there's just a small opportunity to negotiate an end to this conflict, and to stop this, because I think the Russian people want to stop it. I think Ukraine wants to stop it, and talking is much better than fighting. But a peace negotiated on Russia's terms is, I'm afraid, not a peace. That is the Minsk Agreement.